Hey folks, so we are talking about Measure for Measure Act 2 right now in this video. So let's just get right into it. So some generalities about what happened in Act 2. Major plot points. Act 2, Scene 1, Angelo and Aeschylus decide how to rule Vienna, and then Angelo gets bored with routine matters of state. This is the scene where Elbow is there and he's talking with Pompey and he's talking with Angelo and Aeschylus and talking about how his wife was slandered. Um, that whole scene is a little bit confusing. I'm going to talk about that in this video so you can get a little bit of a better idea as to why it's there and what it's meant to do. Act 2, Scene 2, Angelo reaffirms Claudio's execution date. Angelo speaks with Isabella for the first time, and Angelo finds himself moved, in air quotes, by Isabella. Act 2, Scene 3, the Duke goes to the jail and meets Juliet. He tells her that Claudio will die tomorrow. Act 2, Scene 4, Angelo and Isabella meet again. Angelo propositions Isabella. Things are starting to heat up here. All right, so what is important about Act 2, Scene 1? So we've got some questions. What does Angelo's reaction to the law tell us about him as a character? And what does Angelo's reaction to the suit in question regarding Elbow's wife say about him as a ruler? So let's break these down. Well, his reaction to the law, it tells us that he wants to enforce the law and that he sees lack of enforcement as weakness, right? And it's not just his own personal weakness, it's not the Duke's own personal weakness, although it is both of those things as well if they don't enforce the law. It's also a weakness in the city of Vienna, okay? And we can see that right away. He's talking to Aeschylus and he says, "We must not make a scarecrow of the law, setting it up to fear the birds of prey, and let it keep one shape till custom make it their perch and not their terror." If you looked at that and said, "What in the world is this? There's a metaphor, there's other stuff going on. How am I supposed to understand this?" Well, essentially, what he's saying is we can't just let this law be in place and be something to scare people without having any sort of action behind it. He's saying that, you know, oh, it's going to, the law is now going to be scared instead of being the thing that scares the people. And we shouldn't allow it to be this way. We shouldn't allow it to be something that people rely upon to be dormant. We should have it so that people are worried to break it. Okay. So he's saying we need to start enforcing these laws because we need to be stronger as a city. And then we see that Angelo sees himself as someone who's better than others who fail, right? "'Tis one thing to be tempted, Aeschylus, another thing to fall." Aeschylus had asked him, "Well, haven't you ever felt, an attraction to someone and wanted to act on it just like Claudio did?" Well, he's like, "That's great. Temptation is great. Everyone is tempted, but it depends on how you react to it." And in theory, sure, yeah, that holds water. But in practice, we'll find out that that does not hold true for Angelo. Okay? And then we see Angelo say, "Rather tell me when I that censure him do so offend. Let mine own judgment pattern out my death, and nothing come impartial." He's saying here, if I do the same thing as Claudio does, then I should also have the same punishment. So Angelo here is thinking that he is better than other people. He's thinking that he is above failure. He's thinking that he cannot possibly fall victim to the same feelings, the same passions as everyone else. Okay? And this kind of mirrors what Lucio was saying to Isabella in Act 1, Scene 4, where he was talking about how, I'm just paraphrasing here, how Angelo has ice in his veins, right? He's someone who doesn't feel. And Angelo feels that he is that person as well. But since we've read Act 2, we know that's not true. So, what does Angelo's reaction to the suit in question regarding Elbow's wife say about him as a ruler? Well, as a ruler, he needs to sit in and he needs to listen to suits against people. Okay, he needs to listen to his subjects, he needs to engage them, he needs to help them work through what's going on for the entirety of the population. So he's there with Aeschylus and he's listening. And to be fair, as you were reading this scene, you probably got really bored and really annoyed too. Because one, Elbow keeps misusing words as if Shakespeare isn't complicated and confusing enough to understand. But we've got Elbow in here saying the wrong words all the time, acting silly. Just he just seems kind of flighty, kind of weird, a little flaky. Um, and Angelo gets bored, and he's just sitting there and talking to Aeschylus, and he says, "This will last out a night in Russia, when nights are longest there. I'll take my leave, and leave you to the hearing of cause, hoping you'll find good cause to whip them all." He's basically saying, I'm tired of this. I'm tired of hearing what these people are saying. This is going to take forever. So I'm going to go, right? And then Angelo leaves, and Aeschylus is the one who's left to mediate the complaint, okay? Which is fine. I mean, Aeschylus is an advisor, but Angelo doesn't suggest that he has something better to do. He just kind of says that he doesn't want to be there. And that suggests that Angelo wants to deal with specific issues. He wants to get the country back in order, but he doesn't want to maintain that order. He just wants to restructure things so that they are following the laws that he feels are necessary and appropriate. So, he just sort of dips out and leaves Angelo and Aeschylus, or he leaves Aeschylus to finish up doing Angelo's work, essentially. So that kind of suggests that, maybe he wouldn't really be a good ruler in total if he doesn't care about the minutia of the role. He only cares about the big picture and the perception of the people. Then, yeah, he might not be so great, right? So that is Act 2, Scene 2, and I apologize, Act 2, Scene 1. And in Act 2, Scene 2, we then see Angelo and Isabella interacting, right? We want to talk about what is Angelo's initial response to Isabella, and what is Isabella's initial response to Angelo and to the law, right? Because this is kind of a complicated scene. It's the first time they meet. It's a little bit interesting to kind of see how this works. So, what is Angelo's initial response to Isabella? Well, one of the first things that he says to her is, "Heaven give thee moving graces." Actually, to be fair, it's said as an aside, so he doesn't actually even say this to her. An aside essentially means that he's talking to himself. The audience can hear it, but the other characters can't hear it. So he thinks she's pretty. Moving graces, right? So the way that she looks, the way that she acts, and they're given by heaven, right? So these are something that he considers beautiful. So we also see that he acts coldly to her at times, possibly to overcompensate for the fact that he's like, dang, she's pretty, right? But he says things consistently, saying things like, maiden, no remedy, right? Even in this particular phrase, though, he's identifying her as a woman, which is kind of interesting. Because it suggests that that's how he sees her, and that that she appeals to him in this way. But we also see that he stands by Claudio's sentence. He says, "Your brother is a forfeit of the law, and you but waste your words." Right? He's saying, "Don't bother talking to me about this. Okay, I am steadfast. I have made my choice. This is it." And then he goes on to say, "It is the law, not I, condemn your brother. Were he my kinsman, brother, or my son, it should be thus with him. He must die tomorrow." Right? So he's saying, it doesn't matter who breaks the law. If you break the law, you are responsible to pay the penalty. Right? So Angelo is following a very strict code. If the law is on the books, the law must be followed. And so when Isabella presses him, he says, "I show pity most of all when I show justice, for then I pity those I do not know, which a dismissed offense would after gall, and do him right, that answering one foul wrong lives not to act another." Okay, so basically here he's saying, as a ruler, I need to recognize that anyone who breaks the law is hurting someone else. These laws are here for a purpose, and to break the law would be to demean that purpose if it goes unpunished. Okay, so that's what he's trying to say. He's trying to say that the law is there for a purpose, and anyone who breaks it is trying to upset the social order and the legal order of Vienna. So, what about Isabella's initial response to Angelo and to the law? Well, at first, Isabella is appeased by Angelo's very basic explanation, right? He just says, and Claudio broke the law, he's got to die. And she says, "Oh, just but severe law. I had a brother then. Heaven keep your honor." Right? And it's almost inferred that she just kind of is about to walk away, especially because Lucio's behind her, like her hype man, trying to be like, "No, no, no, keep going, keep going." And this idea, I had a brother then. So she's just like, "Oh, okay, well, if it's the law, it makes sense that the law should be followed." And that's it. Right? So initially, even though in the last act we see that she's kind of concerned about this law and how it affects her brother, we also see that she's a little bit in disbelief because, they have a marriage contract. Here, the explanation of this is the law, I'm following it, it seems like it's enough for her. And then Lucio steps in to hype her up. So she tries a few different kinds of appeals. First, she tries to appeal to Angelo's mercy. She says, "No ceremony that to great ones longs, not the king's crown, nor the deputed sword, the marshal's truncheon, nor the judge's robe, become them with one half so good a grace as mercy does." Right? So she's saying, following the law strictly is great, except for the fact that we have to realize that all situations have multiple sides. There are multiple reasons why people choose to do certain things. And in order to really um, profit in terms of Vienna, and the Viennese people, we need to recognize that we should pay attention to that gray area. What is that reason that this person broke the law? And determine then if mercy should be involved. Okay? That doesn't work, so she moves to a moral argument. She says, "Spare him, spare him. He's not prepared for death. Even for our kitchens, we kill the fowl of season. Shall we serve heaven with less respect than we do minister to our gross selves?" So she's saying everyone dies at a specified time, or should die. They need to have time to prepare themselves for death, right? So she's coming from this sort of religious background that she has, just about to be a nun, right? She's saying that he should be spared because he's just not prepared. So, how can he be prepared to go to heaven if he's not prepared to die? So, she brings it down to something that anybody could understand, right? We only kill the fowl of season, right? The bird that's in season, for food. So, why would we then, now that we're just sort of reintroducing this law, now that the law has been out of season and we're only just coming to the beginning of the season, why should it be that we now just kill Claudio because he breaks this law that's now coming back into play? Angelo still doesn't buy it. So she starts getting frustrated. She says, "Oh, it is excellent to have a giant's strength, but it's tyrannous to use it like a giant." So here she's telling Angelo that he's acting like a tyrant. He's acting like a dictator. He's not acting like a ruler who's keeping his subjects in mind. He's just wielding power for the sake of wielding it. Okay. And she brings that up again when that doesn't work, in her religious argument as well. "Could great men thunder as Jove himself does, Jove would never be quiet. For every pelting petty officer would use his heaven for thunder, nothing but thunder. But man, proud man, dressed in a little brief authority, plays such fantastic tricks before high heaven as makes the angels weep, who with our spleens would all themselves laugh immortal." Right? So here she's saying that, if people could act as gods, they would choose overwhelmingly to do that, and they would act in that way consistently, right? So she's also saying that men who have authority are wielding this authority of God, especially in this particular instance, because the Duke is a representative of God on earth. But using their power to, sort of demean others and as a means for themselves, right, abusing their power, would make those who are pious and those who are pure, like angels, um, weep, and those who could find this ironically funny laugh, right? So we see Isabella trying to respond to Angelo and the law as she's discussing this with him, right? Everything that she's talking about is framed through Angelo's response to Claudio's sentence and death. So that's kind of what we see in Act 2, Scene 2. So let's move to Act 2, Scene 3. This is a short scene, so we're just going to kind of buzz through it. But what do we learn about the interaction between the Duke and Juliet at the prison? Well, we see that the Duke is taking his performance of a friar seriously, right? He starts off by saying, "Bound by my charity and my blessed order," right? So he's saying this out loud. He's saying that he is part of the order, right? Essentially, he is a friar, um, and he is bound by charity, right? This idea that he needs to administer wellness or comfort to the people because of the fact that he is a friar, right? So he really is just going to town and filling that role. Now, he also wants to meet the prisoners so that he may minister to them accordingly, right? So we see too that he is looking to comfort people in terms of his new position that he just sort of takes on. And then we see that Juliet wants to repent to the Duke, who, again, is dressed as the friar, right? "I do repent me as it is an evil," right? The fact that she has slept with Claudio, she's now pregnant, and that shame that she talks about in this scene is actually the visible proof of her indiscretion, right? Her pregnant stomach. So, we see that everything in this scene between the Duke, who's dressed as a friar now, and Juliet, who is recognizing him as a friar, is through that lens of, religious authority. Okay, so keep that in mind. Now, let's move to Act 2, Scene 4. This is one of my favorite scenes because it's the most interesting and the most funny, I think. But we see, there's a few things that I want to talk about. One is now, what does Angelo think of Isabella? What does Isabella think of Angelo? And what new information do we learn about Isabella? As well as what does Isabella think about her brother, right? What does she think about Claudio? So, what does Angelo think of Isabella? Well, we know Angelo is very attracted to her. She's about to come in. She's already been announced by the servant, and he says, "Why does my blood thus muster to my heart, making both it unable for itself and dispossessing all my other parts of necessary fitness?" Right? He's saying, "Why is my heart pounding so much? I can't focus on anything but this feeling in my heart." Right? And remember, the heart is the symbol. So he's just having this passionate reaction to Isabella, and he's very confused by it. He doesn't understand it because this is likely something he's never interacted with before. But then we see that he comes up with a plan to engage with Isabella. Engage in air quotes again. There's lots of air quotes in this play. It's fabulous. He says to her, he gives her a hypothetical. He said, "Which had you rather, that the most just law now took your brother's life, or, to redeem him, give up your body to such sweet uncleanness as she that he hath stained?" He basically pitches to her like, would you rather see your brother die, or would you rather sleep with someone to allow him to live? And Isabella is kind of like, huh? What's happening here? And she sort of goes along with it in terms of a hypothetical. We'll get to that interaction in the next slide. But then, once Angelo sees that Isabella isn't really engaging in the way that he wants her to, she's not just saying, "Oh, yeah, I would totally do the same thing to save my brother." He tries to be a little bit more forceful, right? And he tries to be more direct. He says, "You, his sister, finding yourself desired of such a person, whose credit with the judge or own great place could fetch your brother from the manacles of the all binding laws, and there that were no earthly mean to save him, but that either you must lay down the treasures of your body to this supposed, or else let him suffer, what would you do?" So he takes that hypothetical and he puts it to Isabella as a question for her. Okay, so he's saying, if you knew somebody who could, save your brother's life, would you give them your body, like the treasures of your body? Would you sleep with them? Would you have sex with them? Or would you just let him suffer? And when that doesn't work, he makes a gendered argument. And he says, be that you are, that is, a woman. If you be more, you're none. If you be one, as you are well expressed, by all external warrants, show it now by putting on the destined livery. Okay, so if you're not sure what a livery is, it's basically clothes, right? It's clothes in this sense. It's a metaphor, right? Putting on the destined livery is accomplishing the actions that women must accomplish, essentially sleeping with a man. Okay. So you see that he's trying to play on that. He's like, that's kind of what women are for. Being a little bit of a chauvinist here. Um, if you're better than that, then well, you're nothing in this instance. And you're obviously well expressed, meaning she's beautiful, right? So he's saying like you should just do this thing because it's what women do, and and because I want you to. Right, so we see that Angelo does have a very direct interest in Isabella, and he doesn't mind just sort of going for it. Now, how does Isabella take that? Well, she keeps trying to return the conversation back to hypotheticals or to Claudio. She says, that I do beg his life, if it be sin, heaven let me bear it. You granting of my suit, if that be sin, I'll make it my morn prayer to have it added to the faults of mine, and nothing of your answer. So this is right after Angelo has said, would you sin to save your brother's life? And she's like, you know, if it's a sin that I want him to live, I'll deal with it. If you help me out and let him live, if it's a sin, well, I'll pray for forgiveness, right? And so she's turning this sort of proposition into, you know, she's kind of distancing herself from it and saying, this isn't about me, this is about Claudio. And she's removing her body from his like voyeuristic, or attempting to move her body from his voyeuristic gaze. And she then, kind of keeps talking and engaging with Angelo as he continuously becomes more and more direct, and she finally realizes, she's probably realized sooner, but she tells him that he's being a hypocrite. Okay? She says, let me be ignorant and in nothing good, but graciously to know I am no better. Right? So Angelo has essentially just told her, I don't know if you're being, ignorant of what I'm trying to do here on purpose, or if this is just something that's just like going right over your head because you're so naive. And she says, like, I'd rather be ignorant than to think that I'm better than someone else when really I'm not. Okay. So we see Isabella trying to sort of tamp down Angelo's interest by calling him a hypocrite. And then she flat out refuses Angelo's offer. She says no, and then she says, as much for my poor brother as myself. That is, were I under terms of death, the impression of keen whips I'd wear as rubies, and strip myself to death as a bed, that longing have been sick for, ere I'd yield my body up to shame. She's saying, I would rather be whipped and tortured than yield my body to shame, right? And that shame would be to sleep with Angelo to save her brother's life. Because we want to remember, and we'll talk about this in the next slide, that Isabella is a religious woman, right? She recognizes that her actions have eternal consequences for her soul. So we'll just sort of leave that there, and we'll come back to it in just a minute. Um, and then she takes it one step further, and then she rejects Angelo as a hypocrite. Okay, so it's not just she's saying he is one, but she fully just takes a stand. I mean, you can almost picture her putting her hand out, and she says, sign me a present pardon for my brother, or with an outstretched throat I'll tell the world aloud what man thou art. Right? Essentially, pardon Claudio, or I'll tell everyone that you're just as bad as he is, or worse, because you're trying to manipulate the law to help you. Okay? Then, we see some things about Isabella in this particular scene. We recognize, even though we already could have gathered by the fact that she was becoming a nun, right? We see that she sees her life through a religious lens. Okay? She says, better it were a brother died at once than a sister by redeeming him should die forever. Right? She's willing to make, to commit small sins to save Claudio. She's willing to die to save Claudio. But what she's not willing to do is damn her soul in order to save Claudio. In her mind, if she were to sleep with Angelo, she would be killing herself over and over and over and over again in her soul. Okay? If she were to die once, then it's one time. Okay? So, she's saying that Angelo should kill Claudio if this is the proposition he has to save Claudio, because Claudio's one life is already tainted, right? He's already sinned. He's slept with Isabella. He broke the law. He broke religious code. But he's already done this. So it's better that he dies than for her to be tainted, right? Someone who is pure. So we can see, I mean, maybe you may think of this as selfish, but at the same time, she is someone who steadfastly holds to her beliefs, and we know that because otherwise she wouldn't have wanted more strict rules for herself at the convent. She wouldn't be becoming a nun to begin with. Okay, so we kind of want to keep this in mind about Isabella, that she's worried about her eternal life, not her physical life. And now, what does she think about her brother? Well, she believes that her brother is noble, and we'll see how that plays out. I kind of already hinted in the last act that, Claudio may have been putting Isabella in Angelo's path on purpose to tempt him. So maybe he's not quite as noble as she thinks. But she says, I'll to my brother, though he hath fallen by prompture of the blood, yet hath he in him such a mind of honour, that had he 20 heads to tender down, on 20 bloody blocks he'd yield them up, before his sister should her body stoop to such abhorred pollution. Okay, so she's saying, I'm going to go to Claudio. I'm going to just explain this situation. I'm going to tell him that the only way I could save him is by sleeping with Angelo. I don't want to do that. He's not going to want me to do that. I'm going to be a nun, for Pete's sake. So he would rather die 20 times over than to ask her, right, to ask Isabella to fall in such a way. Okay, and I mean like the biblical fall. Okay, to give in to this act of temptation to save her brother. So we can see that Act 2 is full of temptation. It's full of wordplay, argumentative strategies, rhetorical strategies, and that for me makes it one of the most interesting acts of the play. So I hope that you've enjoyed it as much as I have, and I will see you on the next video.